When the king said, "Let them eat cake," the people replied, "Off with his head." Do you know what I'm talking about? No, not the British royal family. Bigger than that, my friends. I am talking about the French Revolution. So let us take a little trip back in time to France in the late 1700s, where we will see how the French got their revolution and ate their king. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. So says the opening line of a very famous book about this period written by a guy called Charles Dickens. And he's not wrong. In 1789, the French people rose up and revolted against their glorious monarchy. Why? Well, because there was a pretty huge gap developing between the rich aristocrats and the starving poor. In 1789, France was still very much an absolute monarchy. The king was the supreme authority, and the people had no voice in how they were governed. To make matters worse, France was deeply in debt as a result of helping America win its War of Independence. And so the king's solution was to raise taxes, but the burden fell, of course, on the poor. In the cities, the people were getting really, really angry. Things came to a head on July when a group of Parisian intellectuals decided to storm a local prison called the Bastille in search of weapons. They didn't take over the prison, but the next day, when a rumor spread that the guards were about to open fire on an unarmed crowd. Well, the people took it upon themselves to open fire on the guards, killing 4 and taking 7 prisoners. This is seen as the start of the French Revolution. Within days, a group of representatives from Paris went to Versailles to tell the king that his absolute monarchy was no more. They demanded that he sign a document limiting his power and guaranteeing civil rights for the people. He reluctantly agreed. And so began the first modern revolution in human history. For the next 10 years, the French went to war with the aristocracy, both at home and abroad. And in the end, they won. By the end of the 1790s, the old regime in France was completely overthrown. Feudalism was abolished. The privileges of the aristocracy were ended. Slavery was outlawed, and democracy was introduced. And it all came about because the king's wife said that people who could unafford bread should just eat cake. Now that is a very satisfying story, isn't it? A revolution that ends with the revolutionaries eating the king. But was it really that simple? Well, not really. You see, there were many different phases to the French Revolution. The early days, it was largely a middle-class movement aimed at curbing the power of the king and establishing a constitutional monarchy. But then things got more radical, and the revolutionaries started beheading people. By the end, it was basically a full-blown war between the French Republic and anyone who opposed it, including most of Europe. The French Revolutionary Wars resulted in the deaths of around 400,000 people. And then there was the Reign of Terror, a 9-month period in 1793 and 1794, when the revolutionary government executed around 17,000 people, many of them aristocrats, but also many ordinary people who had done nothing wrong except perhaps disliking the revolution. However, by 1799, the fighting had largely ended, and the Republic was victorious. And so the revolution is often said to have ended with Napoleon. Bonaparte's coup d'etat, in which he took power and made himself first consul. Some historians argue that the revolution didn't really end until 1815 when Napoleon was finally defeated. But either way, the French Revolution was one of the most important events in European history. It ended feudalism, destroyed the aristocracy, and gave rise to modern democracy. And it all came about because the French people got sick of being told to eat cake. As for Marie Antoinette, she and her husband, King Louis XVI, were tried for treason and found guilty. Both were sentenced to death by guillotine, and both refused to escape. Louis went to the scaffold on January 21, 1793, at the age of 37. Marie followed him 2 years later, on October 16th. She was only 37 years old. They say that when the blade fell, it marked the end of the aristocracy in France. And if you want to learn more about the French Revolution, well, there's a whole series of videos available. Thanks for watching.